Welcome to Spooky Ass Shit. I am your host, Eric Dwinells, and tonight we have a very special episode. I know I say that a lot. That's probably in the drinking game, whenever Eric says a very special episode. But this really is a very special episode for two reasons. One, it's the first one that I'm recording via Skype, trying out new to me technologies, and making sure that, we can kind of grow the show in the future and interview some far-flung people. And also, this is the very first time I have invited a real live spookaroo on the show.
That's me. I'm a real live spookaroo.
That's you. And your name is Susan Barrett.
I'm an original spookaroo. Am I right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know how long you've been listening, but as far as I'm concerned, you are, because you're active on the Facebook page. We're going to talk more about that in a moment, but so as far as I'm concerned, you're in.
Excellent.
Yeah, how long would you say you have been listening?
I think I started listening sometime last fall.
Oh yeah.
Because I remember I was binge listening because I live in Sonoma County where we had the fires in October, and I was binge listening after that.
Yeah, so you were in pretty early on.
Yeah.
So the way this came about, there's a couple things that happened first. Susan liked us on Facebook, as I advise you folks to do each and every week. She messaged me one day and said, hey, I think it would be good if you had a closed group for the Spookaroos, because that way we can... Well, why don't you explain why?
Well, the specific reason that it came up for me was it was after I guess it was a summer reading list episode with Little Beastie. And I read my best friend's Exorcism. And now I'm actually making my book club read that. And my book club is actually a drinking game, but that's a different story. But so I had commented like, oh, this book was really great. And I realized that my father-in-law was then commenting on my comment. And then I kind of thought, I love my father-in-law. He's a great guy, but I don't need him in my spookaroo conversation. Unless it turns out he's a closet spookaroo, in which case, hopefully he comes to the party. But that's where I was thinking, it would be good if we had a little bit more private place to have a really open conversation.
Yeah, and and then I thought about it and I said, my life is an open book, and I'm just, a song and dance man, basically. So I don't have anyone to worry about embarrassing or employers finding out or something like that. But I could see where, we live in modern times and people will snoop on you if you're applying for a job or something like that, and just family, like you said. So I could see where if you were talking about true crime or UFOs or ghosts or something, you might not want the public to be able to search your name and then find out what you said about, Bigfoot or something like that.
Right. I don't know how much my estate planning clients want to know that I think about people dying in my spare time.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing too. Like, you have a real professional job. I have a professional job too, but it's, mine is kind of come as you are. There's probably other folks out there like that. So I said, you know what? That's a good idea. So we have a closed group on Facebook now. It's called Spookaroos. So you go on Facebook, you search the term Spookaroos, and two things will come up, actually. One will be our page, and you can tell because it's got a spooky logo. And the other one is like a children's clothing line that it doesn't look like it's been updated in a while. I don't know why they took the name Spookaroo, but it seems like they tried it for, a year or two, a couple of years back, and then kind of let it go. So it's ours now. That's our term now.
There we go.
All right. Now, we are going to be talking about the Circleville Letters tonight. And actually, we are going to let you folks in on something. This is the second time we've recorded this episode. I made some mistakes on the first go-round. And basically, Susan was kind enough to come on and, record an episode last night. And because I didn't really know what I was doing, we can't use that particular episode. So this is take two. But I think that's going to be good overall, because now we'll be able to approach it with a little more poise. Susan has a show under her belt. You'll never hear it, but she's got one under her belt already. So this is really her second time doing the show.
I'm an experienced podcaster at this point. So I think it's going to be a high quality show for the people.
Yeah. So the only thing is we're going to have to pretend like our reactions to things are fresh and new. And I might have to ask you some of the same questions that I asked you last night and act surprised about some of the same things that I acted legitimately surprised about last night. But that's the way it is. Before we dive in...
I know we're up to it.
I'm sorry?
I said I know we're up to it.
Right. So before I dive in, I just want to remind everyone to check out the website, spookyas.com or spookyassshit.com. They both take you to the same place, and that is the show's blog page. From there, you can listen to each and every episode, even the early episodes, which are disappearing week by week from iTunes. And you can also find YouTube videos and sometimes outtakes and pictures and all that kind of stuff to go along with each episode. You can also find links to all of our social media. We are at Spooky Ass Shit on both Twitter, which I don't really use, and Instagram, which I've gotten better at. I'm trying to add the hashtags to get more eyes on everything and update more often. I try to do at least one a day, sometimes more than that, but I'm getting better with Instagram, so come check that out, at Spooky Ass Shit. And of course, you can like us on Facebook at facebook.com/spookyas. And when you go to that page, pinned right to the top of it will be the link for you to click to join the Spookaroos. I can't invite you to join the Spookaroos. You have to click on it yourself, and then you ask to join, and I'll let you in. Don't worry. You do have to ask to join, but we take just about anybody, so no worries there. We are a small group, but we are mighty, and we've had some fun stuff there. We've had some discussions about things that we're afraid of, and I'm going to be posting some exclusive videos, and of course, the way Susan got on the show was that I posted on there, and I said, hey, I want to try using Skype, and how about one of you guys come on the show? And she was the first one to respond, so here we are. And also, I felt she deserved it after being a loyal listener. And also, it was her idea to have the closed group in the first place. So I said, yeah, she'd be a good person to have on. All right. Enough of this jibber-jabber. We're going to move on to the Circleville Letters. In 1977, in Circleville, Ohio, there was a population of about 11,500 people, give or take. And when I think of that seems like a lot of people, maybe not an overwhelming amount of people, but I have a hard time kind of picturing it. So I compared it to my hometown of Ashland, Massachusetts, and actually it was considerably smaller than my hometown. And my hometown was small. When I was growing up in it, it was still kind of farmland, basically. So this was, to be smaller than Ashland, Massachusetts, takes a lot. So this is a really small town.
My hometown was also a small town, but it had 45,000 people. So
All
a quarter of that is a tiny little place.
Yeah. It's got to be one of those places where everybody knew everybody and kind of had an idea or at least an opinion on everybody's business. And that all comes into play as we soldier on here. Now, like I said, 11,500 residents. One of them was a school bus driver named Mary Gillespie. One day, Mary received a letter written in strange block handwriting, postmarked from Columbus, Ohio. The letter, at least in part, said, "Stay away from Massey. Don't lie when questioned about knowing him. I know where you live. I've been observing your house, and I know you have children. This is no joke. Please take it serious. Everyone concerned has been notified, and everything will be over soon." The letter was not signed. The Massey referred to in the letter is Gordon Massey, the school superintendent. Now, it's unclear if there was more to the letter that has not been made public, or if it was part of future letters, but the mysterious letter writer went on to make clear that he or she suspected that the married bus driver, Mary Gillespie, was having an affair with the married superintendent, Gordon Massey. Now, this comes to one of the problems that we have with this case. I mentioned right there that we don't know if that's the letter in its entirety or if that's just part of the letter. They mentioned several times that over the course of this whole thing, which is going to go on for years, by the way, they say that thousands of letters were mailed, but you can only find examples like maybe 3 or 4 online.
It's not clear how frequently the letters were coming, like at different periods of time, or whether they were, whether they were sent sort of equally spaced over the years that they were being mailed out.
Exactly. There's a lot, as we carry on too, there's a lot of kind of mysteries involved in this whole case. So we'll talk about them as they come up, but just keep that in mind. We're working with the information that we have, but it's kind of scant information. Now, Mary did not show these letters to her husband, and later on she explained that the reason she didn't was because the alleged affair was not true, and she didn't want to cause her husband, Ron Gillespie, to become suspicious over something that wasn't happening in the first place. Now, the problem is, Ron probably was made all the more suspicious after he found out that she wasn't telling him about these letters, when he got his own letter from the mystery writer as well. Again, the exact details of the letter are not available, but it has been reported that the letter mentioned his wife and the superintendent having an affair, and that it warned Ron unless he reported the affair to the school board, something bad would happen to him or his children. Mary said she thought she might know who wrote the letters, so the group decided to send their own letters to this person, advising him to stop. Yes, now I can see that you're shaking your head over there, Susan.
It's frustrating that we don't know the content of the letters. It's frustrating we don't know the specifics of like the letter that Ron got. We went through it in the first take on the episode. I really didn't think it was a great idea for them to have decided to write their own letter back. I eventually was convinced that maybe that was a reasonable thing for them to have done.
Yeah, and I think the way that you came to that was when I said, well, maybe they thought, this person is threatening things, but she seemed to think she knew who it was, and then maybe if we say, hey, like, we know this is you, cut the shit, we know you're not going to do anything, and if you keep it up, we will go to the police, then, okay, yeah, maybe it kind of makes sense that they didn't go to the police right away.
And then as the kind of later details about who we think that person is that they thought was sending the letters, it kind of provides a little bit more context.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to get into that later.
Well, let's get into it right now, actually. We don't know for sure who they thought the letter writer was. That hasn't been stated publicly to the best of my knowledge. But there is some reason to believe that they thought the letter writer was a guy named David Longberry, who was a fellow school bus driver and who allegedly had a thing for Mary, up to and including possibly making either romantic or sexual advances towards her, allegedly.
And he was a coworker of hers, so he also worked for the school district. So he's somebody who would have sort of had access to information about people in the district, like the superintendent.
But part of me wonders how much of that is that he might have a connection to the school district, and how much of that is that it's a small town. Because how much do the bus drivers really get? I honestly don't know. Maybe they're super involved, but I just remember growing up that sometimes we had very good bus drivers, but we also had some folks that were a little left of center, as we say. So I don't know if they would necessarily be in on all the goings on and the corporate side of the school system, I guess would be the way I'd describe it.
What's interesting, I was trying to figure out who Superintendent Massey's wife was, which I don't think that I found out. But it does look like the superintendent actually lived in the little town of Circleville. Like, he didn't live somewhere else in Pickaway County. So it could well be it was just small town stuff, and it literally was everybody just was right there on top of each other.
Well, that's the other thing, too. I mean, if you have coworkers and, you see someone is always going to somebody else's office when they don't really have a reason to be there.
Right.
Whether something's happening or not, it's bound to, spread around the workplace. So who knows exactly how those details came to light.
Right.
All right. So on August 19th, 1977, so this is a few months I think the first letters came in March of 77. I'm not 100% positive about that. I think that's what I saw in the postmark, though, that they showed on Unsolved Mysteries when they covered this story.
Well, then I'm sure it was correct.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I'm remembering it correctly, but
No.
yeah. So on August 19th, 1977, while his wife Mary was on a solo trip to Florida, more on that later, Ron received a mysterious phone call at home, which made him so suddenly angry that he grabbed his gun and told his children that he was going to confront the letter writer. He hopped in his truck and roared out of the driveway. It was the last time Ron would be seen alive. Later that evening, Ron's truck was discovered smashed into a tree. Ron's lifeless body was still inside. Even though his children did not believe he was drunk when he left home, Ron had a blood alcohol level of 0.16, which is twice the legal limit. Forensic evidence suggested that Ron's gun had recently been fired, but the bullet was never recovered. There were no bullet holes found in Ron's body, and his death was eventually ruled accidental. Now, I assume when they say accidental, that they mean that he was drunk and crashed the truck and the impact killed him. But because we don't have a lot of information on the scene of the accident or the autopsy or whatever, it's only an assumption. I wish we had more details. My first question is, are they saying that the crash is actually what killed him, like definitively what killed him? Or is it possible that, there's a bullet that hasn't been found in his body somewhere? That seems unlikely, but just something I would like a definite answer to. Or maybe he had a heart attack or an aneurysm or something along those lines.
Right.
And then, I want to know what the scene looked like. Were there skid marks all over the road? Did he, how exactly did he go off the road? Where was the gun found? Was it possible that Ron had fired the gun himself? Like perhaps he was chasing and shooting after somebody, and he suddenly lost control of his vehicle and crashed. It all kind of seems unlikely, but we can only speculate in the meantime.
And what was the timing on it? If his kids, who we don't know how old they are, but if his kids were saying when he left the house, like, oh no, he wasn't drunk, and then his body showed a 0.16. What happened? Did he go somewhere? Were the kids just mistaken or maybe too young to accurately gauge that? Who did he encounter? And just how far apart did these things happen in terms of time?
Right. Like, did it happen 10 minutes after you left the house, or was it a couple hours or something later? We don't know. We don't have that information. Again, more mysteries within a mystery. So the Pickaway County Sheriff, Dwight Radcliffe, he, according to Paul Freshour, Ron's brother-in-law, he said, so Paul Freshour talked to the sheriff, and the sheriff said, yeah, this was definitely a homicide. We're going to investigate this, and we're going to let you know what's going on. And then after the ruling of accidental death came from the coroner, then he says the sheriff came back to him and said, I don't know what you're talking about. No, I always thought this was an accident. Mm-hmm. So Paul Freshour is kind of like, I think there's some kind of cover-up going on here. I think somebody got to the sheriff and made him change his verdict on the death of Ron Gillespie too. Right.
And then other questions come up later, or maybe the same questions come up later as well around Sheriff Radcliffe has got his own stuff going on.
He does.
As we will find out.
Yeah, well, and right around the time that this ruling was made public, local residents began receiving more anonymous letters. This is outside of the Gillespie family, just people in town, which again detailed Mary Gillespie's alleged affair with Gordon Massey and accused Sheriff Radcliffe of orchestrating a cover-up. Now, soon after this, Gordon Massey got divorced. After all, the whole town, suspecting that you are cheating on your wife, must put a lot of stress on your marriage. But
One would think.
Yeah, don't feel too bad for Gordon Massey, though, because it didn't take him long to find new love in the arms of the newly widowed Mary Gillespie. Now,
but there were quotes around that new, right?
Yeah. Despite how incriminating all this looks, Gordon and Mary both maintained that they did not start their relationship until after Ron Gillespie had died. Now, I don't know if that means that he was still married or if they waited, I don't know what the timeline is exactly, but they do state that it was at least after Ron had passed away. Now, even if that's true, it's not, I guess inappropriate would be the word I would use.
Yeah, I don't love it. I don't love it for them.
I absolutely don't believe that's true.
No, it's definitely not true. And even their cover story, like even the story that, oh no, it just happened later, is ridiculous. If we're to believe what Mary and the superintendent are saying about that, then Mary's saying, okay, my husband basically died as a result of a car accident that was set in motion because of these letters that were threatening to reveal an alleged affair with this person, Gordon Massey. So what I'm going to do is, now that my husband has been killed in this car accident, is go hook up with him. It doesn't seem believable to me. And if it is, if that's true, it's just not great judgment, let's say.
Yeah, so there, a lot of people in town felt the same way we do, that, their story is BS. And it's often speculated, although I don't know what proof there is of this, but it's speculated anyway, that Mary's trip to Florida was in fact a secret hookup with Superintendent Massey, who also allegedly took a trip to Florida at the same time. So while her husband, when he had this accident, she was out of state alone, and possibly hooking up with her, wayward superintendent.
So who made that call?
Well, that's the question, and unfortunately, we don't have an answer. We can make some guesses later on as we go, but we don't. Even then, it's really just kind of you pick them. There are a lot.
It's so frustrating.
Yeah. It's another one of these mysteries in the mystery, and there's a lot of details missing from the story. I would like to know how long it was between Ron's death and the Massey's divorce, and how long before Mary Gillespie and Gordon Massey acknowledged their relationship. It's also unclear, again, as I said before, if more letters were sent after this time, or if the letter writer just took a break, because I can't find any additional reports about letters until 1983, which is several years down the road, 5 years down the road.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the absence of information is just so frustrating, because we can't really, it's hard to put it into any real context.
Yeah. So Mary started receiving threatening letters again in 1983. Again, the details of the letter's contents are not known, but it is a safe assumption that they were unkind and graphic in nature. Now, at about either 2:30 or 3:30, I've seen both times reported online, but at one of those times, 2:30 or 3:30, on February 7th, 1983, Mary was driving her school bus route when she saw a threatening sign attached to a fence post which mentioned her daughter. Again, the exact details are not recorded, but it was most likely unkind and graphic in nature. Mary pulled over and attempted to take down the sign, but when she did, she discovered that a piece of twine had been used to tie the sign to a small cardboard box. Inside the box was a loaded .25 caliber pistol. The trigger was also tied with a string. It is believed that this booby trap was intended to shoot Mary as she tried to take down the sign. Luckily for Mary, the gun did not fire.
What do we think about this thing? Do we think it was really intended to work?
I don't know. It reminds me of Looney Tunes, which we did an episode about a couple weeks back. A Wile E. Coyote type, trap.
It's a Rube Goldberg contraption.
Yeah, it sounds like it was not professionally done, although I wouldn't know how to rig up a gun to automatically shoot somebody either. But then again, I've never planned on either murdering someone or even making it look like I was going to. So I can't exactly put myself in that frame of mind.
Right. I mean, it just seems like there's so many steps that they have to assume are going to go exactly right if it's really supposed to go off. But who knows? Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, it does seem like it would just be easier to walk up on her somewhere and,
Right.
I don't know. It does seem like an odd way, leaving a lot to chance, like you said.
Yeah.
So this time Mary didn't, wait, and she went right to the police. She brought the booby trap to the police, and they discovered that someone had made an attempt to rub off the gun's serial numbers. However, in the crime lab, they were able to make out the numbers, and it turns out that the gun's serial numbers were matched to a gun that was registered to Mary's former brother-in-law, Paul Freshour, who had recently divorced Ron's sister, Karen. So just to make sure we're clear on this, Ron Gillespie, married to Mary Gillespie, had a sister named Karen, and she was married to this guy, Paul Freshour. And they just recently got divorced. Just to keep that fresh in everybody's mind. So now it turns out this gun, at one point, belonged to Paul Freshour.
So what do we think about this?
Well, obviously, based on just that information, it seems it would make you think, okay, well, this guy Paul Freshour, he's a viable suspect. It was his gun. They found it. There was an attempt to obscure the serial number. It didn't work. So yeah, this is probably the guy, and he's probably just not very bright.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of. I don't want to make a generalization of all the people of Circleville, but it seems like there may be a lot of that going around.
Yeah. So when he was questioned by Sheriff Radcliffe, Paul admitted that he did own a gun, and in fact that gun with that serial number, but he claimed that he kept it hidden in his garage and that he never used it and that he hadn't even checked on it in a number of years. He claimed that the gun must have been stolen, and since he had basically buried the gun in storage, he didn't even notice it went missing and couldn't have said how long it had been missing for.
That's not great for him.
No. And then Sheriff Radcliffe, now this is an amusing part of the story. Sheriff Radcliffe is interviewing Paul, and he says, Paul, we're going to do an impromptu handwriting test. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you these letters that were sent by the Circleville letter writer, and I want you to copy them as closely as possible.
It's called the Radcliffe test.
I guess. I mean, that is not in any way, shape, or form how handwriting analysis should be done. Even today, now in courtrooms, from what I understand, the whole business of handwriting analysis is kind of coming under fire in general, and let alone when you ask someone to actually copy the letters.
Right, right.
That there's no way. I can't imagine how that flew in court, or even with the DA's office or whoever he had to go to press these charges against the guy. But Sheriff Radcliffe was the one who administered this so-called test, and he's also the one that decided that, hey, this handwriting matches close enough. You're probably the guy who did it.
Oh.
And then he used that as actual evidence. And I said last night, maybe it's because I am the Witch Finder General of Salem, Massachusetts, and I often have the witch trials on my brain, but it just reminded me of the witch trials, like just these ridiculous tests that they come up with, and then because you can pass it because they make it impossible for you not to pass, then you must be guilty.
Right. I mean, it's like they put on, had somebody dress up as a suspect in a lineup or something.
Yeah. Yeah. It's and then again, not only that, but as far as I know, there's no credentials on Sheriff Ratcliffe that he has any knowledge of handwriting analysis. So I would think you at the very least need to qualify as an expert of some sort.
And even then, well, I mean, there's just I wonder if Sheriff Radcliffe did stuff like that in all of the cases in Pickaway County, or, if it was, there are questions, but it sure is weird.
Yeah. At the very least, it's weird. The sheriff brought murder charges against Paul, and Paul was put on trial, and his former sister-in-law, Mary Gillespie, testified that shortly before their divorce, Paul's ex-wife, Karen, confided in her that she believed Paul might have been the real author of the threatening letters that she had received years earlier in 1977. Go ahead.
There's something weird about that statement. There's a hearsay problem with that statement, but I wasn't at the trial, so I don't know what the justification for that was. But it's information that's coming from people that we find out have motivations.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that a little bit, because Karen, the ex-wife of Paul Freshour, sister of the now deceased Ron, she, they got divorced, and Paul won custody of the children and the house, which, as I said, at least stereotypically, according to movies and television that I saw growing up, that was generally speaking not what happened in a divorce. The kids in the house usually went to the wife. That's the stereotype anyway. So it seems a little unusual that he would get full custody, and make me wonder what the issue was with Karen.
And then we find out, too, that she, after the divorce, is living on a trailer on Mary's property. I guess we don't know all of the facts around their divorce, but you could see where she could feel like there were some inequities, maybe.
Yeah, and she might be feeling a little vengeful.
Vengeful.
Now, the other thing that Paul mentions on the episode of Unsolved Mysteries, because they actually interview Paul Freshour himself, and he says, if my wife thought that I was the letter writer, why didn't she bring that up during our divorce proceedings, during the custody trials or whatever and all that?
Exactly.
It seems like that would be something you would want to tell the judge. Oh, by the way, my ex-husband here is crazy, and he writes threatening letters to family members, so you should probably take that into consideration when you're talking about where the children should end up. She never mentioned it.
Right.
Until he was put on trial for this attempted murder.
Not very credible.
Now, speaking of not very credible, Sheriff Radcliffe told press interviewers that Paul had actually confessed to writing around 40 to 50 threatening letters. Paul himself denied ever making such a confession, and, strangely, there is no written proof or documentation to verify Radcliffe's claim. So he says he got this confession, but there's absolutely nothing that exists to back him up.
It's really frustrating that we can't find out more information about that trial, too. There's so many things that it's just hard to believe that, like, an attorney couldn't argue around, for example, the handwriting, like the initial conclusion that, if we tell somebody to match this handwriting, that somehow has any evidentiary weight.
Yeah.
It's really frustrating.
Yeah, and I mean, we mentioned that this was a small town, but on the other hand, it was only 25 miles or so outside of Columbus. So it's not like I know that towns can vary even just from the next town over, but this isn't exactly like the boonies, middle of nowhere. They're still near a major city.
It wasn't the 1850s either. At this point, it's the middle 80s.
Yeah, and that to me is the biggest reason it's surprising that you can't find more detailed information. Like, yeah, it was pre-internet, but not by that much, and especially with all these amateur sleuths out there now these days, I'm just surprised there isn't more out there on the internet. Everyone's kind of forced to report on the same things that have been found since Unsolved Mysteries was taped in 1990, whatever.
Yeah. It may just be the criminal case is too old to be on their court website, or Ohio may just not do that.
But again, it seems
it'd be nice to see.
Yeah, it seems like somebody would have tried to get that information now that the case is kind of famous, and the internet is a thing now, and there's plenty of web sleuths out there that, would be trying to dig into this kind of thing. I don't know. There's some more problems with the case against Paul, though. First of all, or third or fourth of all, his fingerprints were not found on any of the letters, the gun, the booby trap itself, and there was a search done of Paul's house, and it failed to turn up any more evidence, such as perhaps ammunition for the gun, or materials which would have been used to construct the sign, or the booby trap. There were shoe prints found at the scene where the trap had been set, and they did not match Paul's shoe size. Now, Paul was not working on the day of the attempted murder, but he did have an alibi witness that placed him at home between the hours of 12:30 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. The prosecution responded with a surprise rebuttal witness who testified that he saw the sign along Mary's route somewhere between 11:30 a.m. and 12 p.m. that day. But he never notified the police, and there were no other witnesses who reported seeing the sign before Mary found it that afternoon, either at 2:30 or 3:30 p.m.
So we've got a big gap in time, and we've got a surprise witness, and we've got a surprise witness, we've got a supposed confession to someone who's, got reasons to put Paul in jail. We've got unmatching footprints. We've got no evidence in Paul's house.
No physical evidence at all, aside from the gun that he used to own. He says went missing. The police are apparently saying, no, he probably just got it out of his garage or wherever. But yeah, no. Other than that, no evidence at all linking him to this crime. But despite all that, Paul Freshour was found guilty of attempted murder and sentenced to the harshest sentence available, which was 7 to 25 years in prison. Now, years later, there was an investigative reporter named Martin Yant. Do I have that right?
Yep,
that's right.
Martin Yant.
He was investigating this case. He asked to see Sheriff Radcliffe's investigation files. And as he was looking through it, he found that there was actually another witness. Minutes before Mary discovered the booby trap, another school bus driver was driving along that route, and they reported seeing a yellow El Camino parked at that spot, and standing next to it, there was a large, sandy-haired man. The man saw the bus driver looking at him and quickly turned to make it look as if he was just peeing off into the brush on the side of the road. The description of the man did not match Paul Freshour. However, the description of the man did match the man that Karen Freshour, Paul's ex-wife, was dating at the time. Additionally, Paul never owned a yellow El Camino, but Karen's brother did. So here the plot thickens a little bit more.
Exactly right. Be interesting to know how the footprint at the scene of the crime compared to the the boyfriend's. They're saying he's larger, I think, than Paul. Be interesting to know how that played out, but of course we don't have the information. Then the giant problem of the fact that the prosecution side had information about this witness, I think, that's my understanding, and didn't disclose that to the defense side. And then I'm not sure why, it doesn't seem like anything came of that, because Paul winds up serving whatever the length of his term is.
There's another problem with Paul being locked up in jail, right? Because after he's locked up, the letters, you would think they're going to stop, because the letter writer is now caught, he's in jail, no more letters. But guess what? There were more letters, and now they were being signed by the Circleville writer. Now, these letters started being mailed out to people all over central Ohio, so not just in the towns, surrounding Circleville anymore. And again, we don't have exact details of what the letters said, but in interviews that I found online, people were saying that they were very graphic and sexual in nature most of the time, and kind of taunting and threatening and those, kind of statements. The the letters were all postmarked, just like the original letters, from Columbus. Now, Columbus is 90 miles away from the prison in Lima where Paul is serving his sentence. So if we want to believe that Paul is sending these letters from prison, we have to believe that he somehow smuggled them out of the prison and had someone mail them for him from Columbus.
Exactly. It was a significant number of letters, too. It wasn't just one letter.
No. And again, I don't have exact details of how many or how long they went on for, but this is, one of the mysteries of the mystery. Sheriff Radcliffe was the one saying, yeah, somehow, Paul is still getting these letters out from prison. Look, I got the right guy. He's just still sending the letters out somehow. So in response to this, the prison placed Paul in solitary confinement and denied him any access to any writing materials. And he was also constantly monitored. But even so, the letters kept coming. Now, the big question here is, why is Sheriff Radcliffe so insistent that Paul has to be the guy?
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, we can only speculate about it. What are your thoughts?
Well, it really seems like that really seems to be the case. I mean, the handwriting piece, I don't know if the sheriff was a part of not disclosing the exculpatory witness. I don't know if the sheriff specifically would have been involved with that. But the handwriting piece, and then this nonsense that somehow, it's not Sheriff Radcliffe's explanation, I think, for this isn't even that, Paul somehow has somebody outside working with him. It's like he's actually smuggling them.
Right.
So he's really entrenched in the idea that it's got to be Paul.
Right. Yeah, it's strange. I mean, we could go the route that he's involved in some kind of elaborate cover-up, but also I think we can simplify it and say, well, maybe just as a sheriff, there's pressure on him to find the person. And then when he thinks he has found the person and the court has agreed that this is the person, then there's pressure on him to make sure that this person stays the person that's being held responsible. Because, sheriffs are elected. And
exactly.
This could be a problem for his career in the future. But the warden at the prison maintained that it was impossible for Paul to have sent these letters, to have smuggled them. But even so, after 7 years in prison, Paul came up for parole. And at his first parole hearing in December of 1990, he was denied. And the reason they gave was because the letters had not stopped. Another one of these leaps in logic that just don't make any sense.
This one really feels like it's from what I would imagine was going on at the witch trials.
Yeah.
We know there's something going on. We know you cannot possibly have done it, but you're not really in a position to defend yourself, so we're going to keep you in jail.
Yeah, well, it's like, yeah, because you won't confess, we know you must be guilty.
Exactly.
We know you won't confess, and yet these things are happening, so you must be guilty.
Right.
It couldn't possibly be that it's somebody else. It's, yeah. So, but anyway, a few days after this, after he was denied parole, Paul himself received a letter from the Circleville letter writer. And it said, "Now when are you going to believe you're not going to get out of there? I told you 2 years ago. When we set 'em up, they stay set up. Don't you listen at all. And no one wants you out. No one. The joke is on you. Ha ha. Tell no one of this letter. I saw the paper. Great news. The sheriff loved it. Ha ha. Do you believe it now? Do you?" Paul did not get paroled until May of 1994. With the support of investigative journalist Martin Yant, the Circleville letter writer's case wound up being featured on Unsolved Mysteries. Now, I don't know exactly when this episode came out. I probably should have looked that up, but it had to have been sometime after May of 94, because that's when Paul was out, and he was out during the time they did this interview, I believe. But while the show was working on the story, heading into Circleville to film segments and all that, they were famous for using the real settings and the real people whenever they could. Um, the offices of Unsolved Mysteries received an anonymous postcard signed by the Circleville writer. It read, "Forget Circleville, Ohio. Do nothing to hurt Sheriff Radcliffe. If you come to Ohio, you El Sickos will pay." Now, of course, Robert Stack, the Stack Attack, he don't back down for nobody. And Unsolved Mysteries continued with the story anyway. Although he is dead now, so maybe.
Who knows?
No.
It's interesting that they're saying that the letter, that they're saying we to Paul Freshour in the, like, when we set him up, they stay set up. And then that piece, the "no one wants you out," does sound like something that would be coming from his vengeful ex-wife. Like, that just is so kind of twist the knife.
Yeah, and I gotta be honest with you, in general, this might sound a little sexist, but this seems to me, it just seems like a womanly kind of crime.
Poison pen.
Yeah, just the letter writing and the kind of sneaking around. I think just in general, men aren't that crafty when they, it's more of an immediate kind of thing. Like, we're going to go and do this. I mean, there are people that just like to cause fear. But it seems more like this was just kind of like gossipy kind of things going around. And so anyway, that's my two. I might cut that whole part out because I don't think I came off very well on that. But I'm just saying, my gut reaction says, yeah, this seems like a woman did this.
I think there might be a statistic about who whether more women or men do poison pen stuff, but I don't happen to know what it is. But I was going. Well, I'm not going to say what I was going to say, 'cause then I have to tell you to cut it.
So Paul Freshour attempted to clear his name, and he wrote to the FBI asking them to help by investigating Ron Gillespie's death. But nothing ever came of it, and he passed away in 2012, so I don't think they're going to be doing any deep dives now to try to clear his name since he's passed away. So the question remains, who is or was the Circleville letter writer? We have a list of the major suspects. First of all, of course, is Paul Freshour. This is the man that the sheriff believes to be the culprit, and this is the man that was found guilty. Actually, technically, he was never found guilty of being the letter writer. He was found guilty of the attempted murder, which could be a separate and unrelated thing, but, it was believed that the two went hand in hand. But, again, for all the reasons above, it seems to me like he probably wasn't even guilty of that attempted murder, let alone writing the letters. Also, what would his motive be?
That's where I think Paul, where I kind of just lose Paul as a potential suspect, because he doesn't have anything to gain from any of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think at most you could say, like, well, maybe he was upset that this woman cheated on his brother-in-law, but why would he doesn't really have a dog in that fight. It wasn't a blood brother.
Right.
And then you could also say, like, well, if his ex-wife was living on Mary's property, maybe he, was upset with Mary, and so this was what he did, but he'd already won in a sense.
Right. Yeah, that doesn't help him at all, because well, I don't know, I'm jumping to like the middle 80s Ohio, but if she's got a place to live that he takes away from her, then he, as the ex-husband, potentially might have to like pick up the slack on that. So I don't think that helps him.
Yeah. So I don't really see a very good motive for why he would do it. Our next suspect is Mary Gillespie herself. Maybe she made up this whole situation, the original letters, or we're going to get into it, but some of the theories state that the original letters were written by somebody else, and that the 83 and on letters were then written by, person B. But so it's possible that maybe she didn't write the first letters, but she wrote the second series, and that she, this booby trap was never actually planted, that she just kind of brought it to the police station herself and was like, look what somebody tried to do to me.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Although we do have witnesses that say they saw
The
the
sign.
booby trap, but who knows?
Yeah.
Or other people that were in the area too. So that doesn't hold as much weight with me, but it's a thought to consider.
Right.
Now, her motive would be to get rid of her husband, who did die during all of this under mysterious, at least, circumstances, so that she could be with the Superintendent Massey, which she did end up with. And then by framing her brother-in-law, Paul Freshour, for reasons unknown.
Uh-huh.
I don't know why she would want to set him up. Aside from, again, maybe she's become very friendly with Karen, her former sister-in-law, and Paul's ex-wife, and they just kind of went in on this little plot. Or
if Mary wrote the early letters, that one feels not very believable to me. Or she's like a different kind of person than I think we've been assuming she is. Like, if she was writing letters to herself saying, oh, you've got to stop this, you're having an affair with this guy, that she then actually later, we don't know how much later, but then actually winds up with, she just seems really, really sketchy to me if she's doing that.
Well,
that
yeah, I don't see any reason why she would write those letters herself. However, maybe it's possible that someone else wrote the letter to her husband, and then she was like, oh yeah, I got letters too, but it's not true, so I never showed them to you. Let me run and get those. And then she quickly, writes these block letter. I don't think that's true, but it's another theory that I'll toss out there.
Possible.
Yeah. Then we have another suspect. This is a guy that we mentioned earlier. This is most people's prime suspect for who wrote the original series of letters, the 77 letters. And this is the man known as David Longberry. He was a co-worker of Mary Gillespie, the bus driver. And again, the motive would be that he made some kind of romantic or sexual advances towards her. And she rebuffed him, and so he was vengeful. Now, okay, we can understand why he might send the letters in the beginning, because he's trying to expose this affair, like, oh, you're not going to be with me, you want to be with this guy, well, guess what, I'm going to tell the world what you're up to. But I don't see any reason then why he would be involved with the 83 series of letters, or why he would care if he framed Paul Freshour, and then why would he keep sending the letters after Paul Freshour was in jail? If someone else was taking the blame for the crime, why then proceed to, send the letters?
He's accomplished whatever he wants to accomplish. Mary, of course, is at that point, I guess, with Superintendent Massey. But that one, it falls apart if we look at him for the later letters.
Yeah, it seems to me that the later letters were really, especially when after Paul was incarcerated, they were really sent to kind of rub it in Paul's face. Like, haha, you took the blame for this. I can even still send letters, and they're still going to think it's you, and it's still going to fuck with your life, because they're going to keep you in jail because they think you're still sending these letters.
Right. But even that, I mean, he's holding on to that for a really long time.
Oh, I'm not saying I think it's him. I'm just saying I think that's why the person wrote those letters later on.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Because I don't think it was him. Now, there is one suspect that doesn't get named in most of the articles, and I wonder why people don't consider this one more often. And this is Superintendent Gordon Massey's wife, whose name I don't know because it's not listed anywhere. Or should I say his ex-wife, the one he divorced so that he could have this romance with Mary Gillespie. Now, her motives are a little bit more obvious. She had a cheating husband, and Mary was a homewrecker, so she's going to write these threatening, scary letters to Mary and spread the news all throughout town. She's hardly mentioned in any articles or stories about the case, but the only thing then that I don't understand is why she would be so vindictive in framing Paul. Again, assuming that the letters are coming from the person who set Paul up. Also, how and why would she have access to his gun and be able to make the booby trap and all that? It just, those kind of, it doesn't really seem like she's a viable suspect, but it's still someone that I wish would be mentioned a little bit more and at least explained away, like why we definitely don't think she was involved.
Right. I mean, did she even know Paul? If they were neighbors or something, it might, then that would put it into context for us. Then that would kind of strengthen her as a suspect for me, but we just don't know.
Yeah, so I think the final suspect we have listed here, this is what most people online, she's kind of the favorite suspect of most people, and I know that includes myself, and I think that includes you as well, Susan.
You're right.
Yeah, this is Karen Freshour, Paul's ex-wife and the sister of Ron Gillespie. Now, if she wrote the original letters, the 77 letters, the motive for this might have been that Mary Gillespie was cheating on her brother, her actual blood relative brother.
Right.
But again, a lot of people believe that maybe the first series of letters were written by somebody else, probably David Longberry, the other bus driver who had a thing for Mary.
Mm-hmm.
And then that she kind of remembered this and used this motif of the letter writer to move forward with this plot to frame her brother-in-law for attempted murder. Now, this is where it gets a little wonky, in my opinion, because this is a very complicated plan. She has to first write the letters to Mary Gillespie saying more stuff about the affair and what we're going to do to you and all this stuff. Then she has to plant the booby trap. Now, okay, she is someone who may have known where this gun was and had access to it. She did live with the man for a time. I'm not sure how long they had been separated by the time that all this happened. Again, that's one of the mysteries of the case.
But we also know that he said it had gone missing at a time he didn't know when or exactly where it had even been.
Right. He didn't know it was missing.
Right.
So, yeah, she would have been able to take the gun and...
without him knowing it was missing.
Yeah, she's probably not a master criminal, so that's why she made an attempt to rub off the numbers, but they didn't really come off. But again, maybe she didn't really want them to come off. She wanted it to be traced back to Paul.
Exactly.
And this is why she's happy, because now, when he goes to prison, she ends up with the house, and she gets custody of the children back.
Exactly, and which she didn't have before. And she was... Before that, he had custody of the kids. He had the house, and she was living in a trailer on Mary's property.
Yeah, the only part that I have trouble with this here is why does she have to involve Mary Gillespie? Aside from the letter writing motif, but it in that sense it does seem a little far-fetched to me that she's going to create this elaborate plan which involves the possible murder of her sister-in-law to frame this guy, unless Mary was in on it and knew that this trap was there and it wasn't really going to go off and she could bring it to the police, and then they had plotted and said, like, oh, this is the way you can get your house back and get your children back.
I mean, it doesn't sound to me like the spring gun was really intended to work. So maybe Mary was in on it. Or who knows? I mean, Karen may have had, I don't know, maybe Mary was in on it.
It's interesting. We're reaching the end here, so that's the last suspect. Although, of course, as we mentioned, there is a theory that there's more than one letter writer, at least two, and possibly even more than that, because people around town might have just been like, hey, this is a good time to start writing letters to people. And when you do see... Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I really think that was probably the case. Because I can't imagine that a town, the way that they describe the letters as sort of including detailed information about the personal lives of so many of the people in town, I feel like people kind of jumped on the letter writing bandwagon and maybe saw it as an opportunity to just write whatever they wanted to whoever they wanted to write it to.
Yeah, I think it's
So
a
like
definite possibility.
Yeah. Like two main culprits, but then probably, or maybe, I'd like to think the whole town kind of joining in.
Yeah. So, Paul Freshour and the reporter Martin Yant both believe that the attempted murder conviction was basically Paul was framed, and the whole thing was set in motion by his ex-wife Karen. So that's the decision they both came to. It's suspected that the original series of letters from 1977 were written by David Longberry. That's the popular theory. And in 1999, Longberry became a wanted fugitive after allegedly raping an 11-year-old girl. But while he was on the run, he committed suicide. So that's all we have on Mr. Longberry.
Yeah. It's not real informative about whether he would have written letters so many years ago.
Right.
I'm just kind of speculating.
Yeah, and it's because it's not like there was another case where it's involved in like maybe a stalking of an adult woman,
right?
Or
like
some
it's
kind
a
of
horrible
obsession.
Crime. Yeah,
but
it's a horrible crime, but it's not related to this.
Yeah, it's a different kind of crime.
And what is it about Mary Gillespie? There's something about her. So she's got Ron. She's got David Longberry. Apparently is sort of obsessed enough with her that he's a suspect. She's got Gordon Massey. And this is a little tiny town.
Well, I mean, first of all, she probably puts out pretty regularly.
I'm just saying.
by this reputation
Come
she
on.
has. I don't know looks wise. I don't think I've found a picture of her. But yeah, that'd be interesting to take a look at. If I can find one, I'll post it. So we have a lot of unanswered questions, and unfortunately this is the most frustrating thing when talking about this case. All these little mysteries that we've been talking about. Was Ron's death an accident or a homicide? Most people seem to believe that this actually was just an accident, but the timing is very, very coincidental. And I'm not saying it wasn't just an accident, but again, the timing is very suspicious.
Right. And that blood alcohol piece is just, that's another piece of the mystery.
And that's really all I have to say about this case. Do you have anything else to mention?
I think we've covered it. I think, I like Karen basically as the 83 forward suspect. I don't know how much I like David Longberry for the original letters, but I don't really have a better suspect.
Yeah, he's just kind of the only one we're presented with. So
right.
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, it's a big mystery. So I recommend that you join the Facebook group, and then you can tell us what you think. And Susan and I will both be on there, I'm sure. So yeah, join us there. So before we leave, I want to once again point everyone to the website, spookyas.com or spookyasshit.com. They both take you to the same place. You can find links to our social media, including Facebook, which is facebook.com/spookyas. And right from the top of the post on that page, there's one pinned right to the top. That's the link you want to click to join the Spookaroos group on Facebook so we can have our private conversations. Thank you, as always, for listening. I truly appreciate it, and it really means a lot to me when I see positive reviews on iTunes or anywhere else where you might happen to listen. So please go ahead and write those positive reviews. It really helps keep the momentum going and keeps me inspired to keep doing the show. And don't forget to share it so we can grow. I'm not a wealthy person, and I can't afford to spare any money to pay for advertising or that kind of thing. So the only way the show is going to grow is if you help by sharing the show with fellow spookaroos, people who are interested in spooky stuff, and of course subscribing to the show on iTunes or wherever you may listen. So, Susan, I want to thank you once again for coming by and spending some time with me here. And I want to thank you for, and I feel weird saying this, but being a fan.
My pleasure.
I was saying I know I said this last night, but it's, I do theater and I do stand up comedy and I have people that come up to me, but I'm certainly not big time by any means. I'm, just a little guy here. Kind of a never was. And so, I have people that come up and tell me they enjoy my work and everything, but it's weird to think that I have, even if it's only a handful of fans. And so I really do appreciate it, and I thank you for it.
The Spookaroo army may be small now, but it's mighty and growing.
I appreciate all of you listening, and especially you, Susan, and I appreciate the dedication that you've shown on Facebook, posting and sharing your thoughts, and coming up with the idea to have the closed group.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I hope to see all of the Spookaroos on the Facebook group.
Yeah, you know what? Last night you said something like, "Oh, you've been in my living room plenty of times," meaning that.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
And that got me thinking. I was like, "Oh, I wonder where people listen to the show." So when you join the group, that's the question I'm going to post for this week. I think is like, "Hey, where do you listen to the show? Show me a picture of, where my voice is going out to and where you guys are listening to this. I'd be interested to see that, just out of curiosity."
Yeah. Thanks.
All right. So with that, I think we're going to let you get on with your evening, Susan. And thank you once again. And hopefully you'll come back and hopefully not too soon, because this recording will go well, hopefully, and we won't have to re-record it.
Right.
But sometime in the future.
Excellent. It would be my pleasure.
All right. And for the rest of you, don't be afraid.